Hello everybody. Today and for the next few videos we're going to be looking at some traps, and this first set of traps comes from the Sicilian defense. So let's get right into it. Sicilian defense. What is that? For you newcomers, e4 c5 marks the Sicilian defense, probably the most popular defense against e4 or the king's pawn opening there is. This first trap takes place in the wing gambit. So after b4, c takes b4, a3, d5, e takes d5, queen takes d5, and if white plays a takes b4, then black will win by queen e5 check. So there is an example of bringing your queen out early in the game and it being actually effective. And of course, white had to play really badly in order for it to work. But that is the trap, ladies and gentlemen. Let's look at another one. e4, c5, c3. This is known as the Alapin variation of the Sicilian. And the idea is to simply establish a broad pawn center, or a pawn duo rather, after the move d4. And this would be possible, for instance, let's say let's just make a random move g6 d4, and say after c takes d4, c takes d4, and white has his dual pawn center. And of course he's better in this position. So that's the main idea behind this move c3. Of course there's other ideas, but that's the main idea. So after e4, c5, c3, d6, I'm sorry, I have g6 played d6. Here's the trap. There's d4, knight f6, attacking the pawn, d takes c5, and if knight takes e4, then queen a4 check picks up the queen. Picks up the knight in the center. Let's look at another one. e4, c5, bishop b5, a6, and bishop a4 would be bad because after b5, bishop b3, c4, white loses a piece. The bishop is trapped. Next trap, e4, c5, f4. This is known as the Grand Prix attack. d5, immediately contesting the pawn in the center. Knight c3, defending the pawn and threatening to capture on d5. d4, attacking the knight. Knight d5. Is there anything wrong with that move? Yes, there is, because after e6, the knight has no place to go. Let's look at our next one. e4, c5, f4, knight c6, knight f3, d6, bishop c4, e6, and now if e5, planning on establishing head on e5, d takes e5, knight takes e5. Can you find black's refutation? Okay, knight takes e5. And what this does, actually before I even show you that, the answer, which is knight takes e5, just look at the position. And notice the weakness of the dark squares leading to the king. Another feature is note that this bishop is only protected by one piece, which is the knight. Once we recognize those two features and combine them together, thus the word combination, right? We see two separate features in the position and we combine them together, making a combination. Knight takes e5, f takes e5, queen h4 check, and we win the bishop because it is forked. Alright, let's look at another one. e4, c5, f4, again Grand Prix attack, knight c6, knight f3, d6, bishop c4. Aggressive intentions, of course. e6, and just note too that you'll see this move bishop c4 in a lot of king pawn openings where for instance e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4 with the attack on the f7 pawn. Also it's possible here, again with the same idea. You also see it in the king's gambit. And that's a possibility. All with the same idea, is putting pressure on the f7 pawn, which is black's weakest point in the beginning of the game, as is f2 for white. Now I say all that to say that the move bishop f4 is not as effective against the Sicilian, and the reason is very simple. Because after bishop c4, white has not committed his e-pawn to e5. In the king's pawn openings, this pawn would already be on e5. Therefore, it is more difficult for white to protect this pawn. Either he has to use the queen, which he doesn't want to do. Sometimes you might have to bring the bishop here, and then sometime that might lead to double pawns, or he has to develop the knight to an awkward square, the knight h6. The defense of f7 becomes more problematic. In the Sicilian, black can just simply play e6 and blunt the action of this bishop on the diagonal. And then what happens after this bishop is blunted on the diagonal, then the bishop is often attacked with a6 and b5, and the bishop either winds up out of the game or it gets trapped. Although there are certain variations where the bishop is placed on c4. Okay, so anyway, bishop c4 is played, e6, castle, g6, Now again, if e5, d takes e5, knight takes e5, and we see the same idea, but instead of the queen coming to h4, right? Because in the previous example, I know some of you were like, hey, this is the same example. No, the difference here is that now white is castled. So instead of the queen coming here, right, there's no king here. Instead, the king has castled, but the symptoms are still the same, and that's the weakness of the dark squares. So remember that, the weakness of the dark squares. So instead of the queen coming to h4, the queen comes to d4 and picks up the bishop. All right. All right. Let's look at one more for today. Then we'll pick up with part 2. All right. So e4, c5, knight c3, d6, and notice I'm starting out with the more obscure Sicilian variations, and then I'll get to those main lines, because I know some people are like, oh, I never played these Sicilians anyway. Knight c6, again there's bishop c4. Now this time e5 is played, and the bishop has greater scope here. d3, bishop g4, and some of you that are tactically alert can see that this is a suspect move, because first of all, the piece is unprotected, so you always look for unprotected pieces in position, because you can wage war against them. And remember what I just explained to you in the last example about the action of the bishop on f7, or against f7 rather, being blunted in the Sicilian by e6. Well, in this game, black chose not to blunt the action of the bishop, but fortify his strength in d4. Maybe perhaps playing knight into d4, putting extra pressure on the knight and threatening the double pawns, especially after d3 has been played and this bishop cannot return here. So the idea is good, but it's tactically flawed. Let's see what happened. Bishop takes f7 check, forking the king and knight, and king takes f7 is practically forced, but let's just show you an example. For instance, if he tries to get fancy and plays king e7 for instance, then just simply bishop takes g8, and if rook takes g8, then bishop g5, winning the queen after king moves. Okay, and just if king d7, that's a quiet move of knight d5, cutting off squares around the king. And black is basically lost material for nothing. So after knight f6, c3, guarding this square so the knight cannot invade, king c8, and castle. White is just better. White has just stolen the pawn, has a great position, and black is just lost. Okay, so after d3, bishop g4, which we acknowledged was a mistake, bishop takes f7, king takes f7, knight g5, and this is the point of bishop takes f7, knight g5 check, attacking the king with the knight, and now this bishop is on Prix, right? But some of you again might be tactically alert and see that just as the queen is attacking the bishop is also attacking the queen. So Black can rescue himself here by playing queen takes g5. And that blows up all of white's plans. So if bishop takes g5, bishop takes d1, rook takes d1. Let's count up the pieces, or the minor pieces rather. Black has 3 minor pieces, white has 2. He has just lost a piece. So be very careful when playing bishop takes f7. Now let's say, for instance, castle took place, and then say black played a move like knight e7. Then this move will work because now the action of the queen, action of the queen is blocked. And then after king takes f7, knight g5, and now there is no capture of this knight. So knight g5 check, and then let's say he went back there, and then queen takes g4 would happen. But that little difference makes all the difference. So white rushed and played bishop takes f7, king takes f7, and thought he had a free piece, but was in for the shock of his life after queen takes g5. Alright, so that is it for today. That's part 1, and tomorrow we'll continue with part 2 with some more traps in the Sicilian defense, and we'll be going through all the openings, just showing you all of these little traps. Alright, see you guys later. Hope you enjoyed, and subscribe.